So right now, what we should be doing today is we will be start writing some small services. Okay, so we will not go into Spring Cloud pretty much today, but let's say we are starting Spring Cloud from tomorrow. When I say we are starting Spring Cloud, what I said about Spring Cloud, I told you that Spring Cloud will give you some features to develop microservices, and it will help you to fix the challenges that we usually have in microservices and when we develop microservices. So to fix those challenges, to understand those challenges that we usually face when we create microservices, first of all, we need to develop some microservices, right? So in today's lesson, what we will do, we'll set our stage. We'll create a couple of microservices. We'll make sure to communicate those microservices with each other. And then we'll try and understand the problem that we usually have when we deal with microservices. And we start bringing in Spring Cloud and one projects from Spring Cloud. And we'll see how the Spring Cloud basically help us to fix and design different things. And well, we'll go into that. Okay, so as I said, today's goal will be pretty simple. It is to, create a couple of microservices. So this is the first microservices that I want to create. We'll create an employee service and we'll create an endpoint right over here called /employee/ID. So basically this particular endpoint will be a get call, and this is going to help you to get an employee based on an ID. So you'll provide an employee ID. This is going to give you an employee back where the ID will be matching. So this particular service that we will create, we will deploy that in a Tomcat server. And of course, we will be creating this application using Spring Boot. So we don't have to deploy it manually on the server because Tomcat is inbuilt. So the moment you'll be starting the employee service, by default, it will be deployed on a Tomcat server, and then only it will expose this endpoint that you will be creating. Okay, and obviously we'll have a database which is going to be our employee database, and this will be connected to our server. This is the first thing that we'll be doing. And also we will be creating another microservice, and this is going to be our address microservice, where we'll be creating a endpoint /address/employee ID. So whenever you're going to hit this endpoint and provide an employee ID, this is going to fetch in the address for a specific employee where the ID matches, and basically gets an address based on the employee ID. This is something this endpoint is going to do. And also we'll make sure to have it deployed on a Tomcat server, and also we'll make sure to connect it with a database which is going to be address database. As I said, each microservices will have their specific databases. Here employee will have employee database, address will have address database. And then this is something that we'll be trying to do today. We'll try to develop this endpoint /employee/1, where 1 is the ID. If you see closely, this is the endpoint that we'll be developing and we are hitting right now. And employees/1 is going to get you the employee detail right here, and it is going to tell you the employee ID, name, blood group, email. And also, if you're going to see it closely, there will be an address attached with this employee. Like for this employee Avilas, this is his address, like lane is something, lane 2 is something, state is something, zip is something, right? So if you're going to see it closely here, this is our employee database, this is our address database. Whenever we are hitting this endpoint, employee/ID, we're going to get this detail: ID, name, group, blood group, email. These 4 things will be getting in this database. But right now we're going to make a call employee/1. So this microservices right now internally call another microservices, which is going to be your address microservice, and going to fetch the address detail from this database. Okay, and that's why whenever we're hitting employee/1, it is not only giving you the employee details and also getting you the address detail. And this address we are basically internally making a call. Whenever you're going to hit this endpoint, it's going to be internally making a call to this endpoint and going to fetch in the address data, attach it with the employee response, and going to get you back. So this is the response I'm expecting whenever you're going to be hitting this endpoint. So this is something that we'll be try and build right now. And to make it pretty simple, first of all, what I want to do, let's use only one database for all my microservices, okay? But we'll be having a couple of microservices, but the data for now, let's store it in one database. And this is an anti-pattern, okay? Because usually every microservices will have its own database, but right now, let's say we have one database and both of the microservices are connected with this, but later we're going to be changing it. Okay, so let's start creating our microservice. I think the requirement is clear. So let's start creating our employee microservice first. So I will be going to my Spring Boot application, and as I said, the employee microservice will be a Spring Boot application. So let me start creating a new Spring starter project. I will call the project as employee service, okay, and com.selenium express employee app is going to be my group ID. Artifact is employee service. Version looks good. Description, I don't need any description. Let's say employee service is going to be my description. And this is going to be my package as well. Okay. And it's going to be a Maven project. Java version, let's change it to 15. We don't have any 15 here. That's fine. It will be anyhow pointing to 17 or 15. We'll be changing it later. Then packaging, it will be a jar packaging. And language will be Java. Yeah, good. So next, so we will be going for Spring Web. So maybe later in the course we'll start using reactive web and Webflux, but for now we will go with Spring Web as we are comfortable building our RESTful web services using the normal Spring Web MVC, right? The next thing that we'll be doing is going to be our dev tools. Let's add our dev tools as well. And also we will be connecting to our MySQL database. So we will have a MySQL driver. And also I want the database connection, the session factory, everything will be created by my Spring itself. And for Spring Boot, we have a beautiful starter called Spring Data JPA, which is going to help me giving some out of the box functionality to have some CRUD operation. So it will help me whenever I'll be fetching my employee data or whenever I'll be saving my employee data. I don't have to create methods, and it's going to get me some out of the box functionality. So right now my employee service is created, and by the time it's getting created, first of all, let's try to do something. Let's go to our database, and we will be using the Selenium Express new database. So this is going to be our schema. So let me make it my default schema. And right now I'll open this schema, and obviously I'm using my MySQL workbench only right here. And yeah, so first of all, let's have an employee table. So I'm going to say it employee, and we're going to have few columns like ID of the employee, and then the name of the employee, email of the employee, and the blood group, right? Blood group. Okay. So ID will be, integer type, and I will set the auto incrementation as true. Name, email, blood group, all will be, let's say, string type. I think this is what we are getting in our response. Can I go to the requirement? And let's see the requirement in a little more detail. And ID, name, blood group, and email. This is good. And address one, we will consider it later. First of all, let's say this is our employee table. And let me start creating one right now by hitting the apply button, right? So I got my employee table created here. And initially, let's have a data one, name is Abhilash, email is let's say, can I drag this in a little bit, and let me say abhilash@gmail.com, and the blood group, let's say O positive. Okay, let's say I have something like this, to and apply, close. There we go. So we are good. So we have one employee in our database, and let's try to create an endpoint right now in our Spring Boot application to fetch in this data into our Spring Boot application. So first of all, this application that we have created, whenever we'll be starting this, we need to make sure that we are getting connected with our database. So first of all, I will try to open this properties file. Okay, so next thing that I'll be doing here inside this properties file, I'll be setting my data source information. So data source dot spring dot data source, come on, show me the properties. Yeah, there we go. URL, and also I'll be setting up the data source dot username, and next one spring dot data source dot password. These three things let me set, and the driver name, driver class, if you want you can set it by using spring dot data source dot driver class name, but I think we have MySQL in our class path. It will automatically figure out my driver and put the MySQL CJ or JDBC driver on the driver, like that's the driver it will be using internally, I believe. So right now, the data source URL, let me just point to my data source that I have created. It will be this schema that will be pointing to where my employee table will be there. So first of all, let me copy the connection. So copy JDBC connection to the clipboard, and I will go and paste it. And the schema that we are using right now is this. Inside this, we have this schema called Selenium Express New, right? So I will copy this schema name, Control C it, paste it over here. So this is going to be my URL, and the username is, I think, root, and the password is Avila. So I think I'm set with my connection information. So whenever I'll be starting with this application, whenever I'll be start this application, a connection pool and a connection will be created out of this information, and that will be done automatically by the Spring Data JPA starter package. So it all happens automatically through the order configuration, like the connection factory, session factory, connection object, a data source object, all will be created out of this information. I don't give a damn how it is creating. So I'll just do a Control S right now. I think we're all set. The next thing that we'll be doing once we are set with this particular thing, let's do one more thing. Let me go to source main Java right now, and let me start creating my endpoint. So let me create a class, and this is going to be my controller class, where I will be creating my endpoint, this endpoint /employee/ID. This endpoint I'll be creating right now. So for that, I'll be needing a controller, and this is going to be my employee controller, right? Simple. Let me just create a employee controller, and this is going to be my REST controller. So let me have the REST controller right here. And the first thing here that I'll be doing, that I will be basically, let me just zoom this in a little bit. I will be basically creating a method public. Let's say I'll just give the method name get employee details. Okay. So let's say somebody will get me a employee ID like this. It will be a get call, so it will be a get mapping, and right now somebody will give me this /employees. So as I said, the URL should be always plural, so make sure you should not call it employee, rather you create an endpoint by giving a name as employees. Make the main component name as plural to follow the best practices. Now employees, and then someone will give me the ID, which will be dynamic. That's why I'm wrapping this off with a curly brace. The next thing that I'll be doing, I'll be capturing this ID with a path variable. So somebody, whenever they will be giving me the ID over here with this URL, I'll be capturing this ID by using this path variable, and the name of the path variable is ID. Whatever is written here, paste it over here. Then you store this value inside a integer, int ID. So we'll be capturing this ID right now. With the help of this ID right now, we'll be looking for the employee that we have inside the database. Let's say somebody will get us the endpoint, somebody will hit this endpoint, either commenting it out over here. I will open up my Postman as well. And in my Postman, let me open this app, and in this app, what we should be doing, let me open this up, and let me just put it somewhere here. Okay, and right now this should be the URL should be localhost 8080 where my application will be running, and let's say this will be employees. This should be employees/1, and now we should be get back our employee 1 data that we have in our database right here. Employee 1 data is Abhilash. We will try to fetch in that data and show it over here in form of JSON. So this is what we are planning to do. So this one will come over here. We are capturing over here, and now let's make a DB call right here and fetch the data of employee 1. Okay, so now this is very easy to do. First thing that we'll be needing to make a database call, first of all, we need to create our entities. So let's create a class, and this is going to be stay inside a entity package, and this class is going to be my employee entity. And right over here in this entity class, first of all, I'll make it an entity. Okay, and I'll make sure that this is where we are pointing to our table, which is called employee. So my table name is going to be, if I'll go to my database, my table name is going to be employee. Control C this, you can see we have a table here called employee. Let's go back to our STS and let's just give the name as employee here. So right now we are creating an entity where we will be mapping our database column name that we have over here to our Java class properties. So I'll copy all the field name. I'll go over here and I'll place it here. And now I'll start creating the properties for all these things. So I'm just pasting it over here just to make sure that I'm reading it well and I'm not doing any mistake. So private int ID is going to be my primary key. Private string name is going to be my name, and private string email is going to be my email, and private string blood group is going to be my blood group. First of all, this ID will be a primary key, so I'll make it a ID just to make sure that this is a primary key. The next thing, it will be the generated value. I'll be setting it as identity. When the ID will be generated by my database, I want it to be mapped with this guy. One second, let me just stretch out a little bit, and let me use the strategy as identity so that the ID will be mapped to this guy, right? The next thing that I need over here, I'll be using my column name, and my column name is going to be name is equal to this guy, ID. So I'm making sure this property is going to be mapped to this column in the database. Now this property will be mapped to this column in the database. I think we all are good with this, right? This is some basic Java, Hibernate stuff or JPA stuff that we are doing over here. And the next thing that we'll be doing over here is that we'll map all the other columns that we have. We'll map the name, we'll map the email, we'll map the blood group. Let me just copy the name, paste it over here, copy the email, paste it over here, just to make sure there is no typo. I'm doing this and copy and pasting the thing. If you trust your spelling, don't do this. Okay, you just directly type the name or something. So the next thing that I will be doing over here, I'll click on source and I'll generate the getter and setter for everything. I'll click on select all to generate. Right now my employee entity is ready, and right now I should be able to make some database call to fetch an entity or fetch an employee entity from our database, and whenever I'll be fetching any record, the employee data will be mapped to this values whenever we'll be fetching it from the database. So all our database values that we have right now, right here, all will be mapped to these particular variables that we have over here in our Java class so that we can use it in our application. Now let me close this and let me save this thing. Obviously, right now we'll be making a DB call. So for now, let's go ahead and create a DAO right here, and in Spring Boot we don't have to create a DAO right away. I will create a repository and I'll say it as employee repository. Okay, the employee repository will extend to JPA repository. Let me expand this, and this will be extends to JPA repository. Do I have it? Oh, employee repo is going to be an interface, right? So it is going to be an interface because the implementation will be created through the proxy in the runtime whenever you will extend to JPA repository. And right over here, you will be specifying the T as your entity name. And right now we have created an entity called employee. I'll map it over here. And inside this employee entity, the ID is basically an integer type. So let's go over here and set this ID as integer, but the generic cannot be a primitive. So I will write integer right over here. Okay. So my implementation for this is going to be generated right away in the runtime, and I'll be able to call the JPA repository related method like save, update, fetch, find, and everything in the runtime. So I'll do Control S right now. So right over here, I'll close this class. I'll close this class as well. And right here in my employee controller, right now we can straight away make some DAO call by writing private employee repo and employee repo here. Right, and I can make it auto-where. Okay, and I can start calling the employee repo related method like employee repo dot find by ID, and you just pass in this ID that I have over here, and this is gonna get you, if I'll do get, it's gonna get me the employee object back that I will be returning. Assign it to the local variable, and there we go. I got my employee object back. Now I can return it over here, and I will get back my thing. This employee object, I can return it over here, and there we go. I'm ready. And I'll be getting my employee related information whenever I'm making this endpoint call right here on my Postman. It is going to get me the employee data by making a database query.
But return, sir. Return. 24th line, it was a typo, sir.
Oh, okay. Return employee. Okay. Anyhow, I'll not be returning this employee object right over here. Why is that? Because this employee is basically an entity, right? And we will not be directly returning the entity because this is going to be a threat to our application if you're going to be directly exposing your entity objects to the outer world. Right now, if I'll be returning employee over here, this is all good. I can just, maybe I can give a space over here and I can write employee. And right now, there we go. We are done. And our application can compile here and we'll be getting our employee data back whenever we'll be making this endpoint call right over here. But this is not going to be a good pattern. So what I'll be doing here, I will be making sure we will not be returning a employee entity directly. Rather, we'll be returning a model object. We will paste the data from the employee object and we will be setting it to a model, which will be our response object, which will be similar as our entity. And then we will copy the data from employee object, paste it to our model object. Then we send it back to the outer world whenever somebody is making a call like this. So those things I'll be actually doing in my service layer. And you know that in your controller, you should not make any database call. Okay, so we will be moving this thing anyhow to the service layer. So first of all, let me create a service package and I'll write service package over here and I'll make it as employee service. And inside this employee service right now, I will be moving the database calls to here. So here I'll be actually making a database call. So I'll say public, and right now this is going to get me an employee object back whenever I will make a call. Let's say get employee by ID. Okay, we'll have a method like this. I will basically maximize it and I will return my employee object here whenever I'll make a DB call. So those couple of lines that we have written here on our controller, let's move it to our service layer right here. And also if I'll go to my controller, this auto varying thing, I'll move it to my service layer right here. Okay, so now I'll also make sure I'm using auto-where here. So my service, I'll annotate it as at service. So it will be a stereotype annotation. And right now employee service will be eligible for component scanning. And whenever the bean for this will be created, the injection will happen automatically for employee repo and the Spring will do it by default. And now here only we are making a DB call. So what I will do here right now, this get employee by ID will basically accept a parameter, and this parameter we will be sending it to this, and this is going to get me a employee object back. Now I can return this employee object right here. Okay, so there we go. and now this is looking good. So now this service object we can basically auto add in our controller. So employee service we can create over here. Employee service, everyone please be on mute, make it E small, and please be on mute everyone, auto add, and there we go. And this employee service, using this employee service right now we can make a call like get employee by ID, and whatever the ID we're capturing from the URL, we will put it over here. We'll make a call. This is going to get me a employee object back, and I will say it a employee, and I'll be returning this back. Let me first of all see this application is working right now or not, as right now we are just directly returning the employee, which is an entity, but later we will change it to a model object. Right now, first of all, let's test this out. So employee controller, do a Control-Shift-O to fix all the imports. There are some problem here, because I don't know, because I haven't saved it. Right now things are good. Let me just start this particular service and let's see if it is working right now or not. Okay, so later we will start fixing by following some best practices here. Now it is started on port number 8080. So now let's just go ahead and let's just hit our endpoints, employee/1, and we are going to get a problem here called method not allowed, because this is a post method, and this employee/1 that we have defined over here is a get method. So if you're going to go to your controller, this is a get endpoint. So let's go ahead to our post main and hit this endpoint one more time, and this time we'll change it to get before we hitting this endpoint, and now we're going to be getting back our employee object here. But the problem here that we are basically returning our employee object directly here, right? Which is an entity. So I don't want to return an employee object, rather I will be creating a employee model. So I will make sure to create a new class, and I'll put it inside a package called response. This is going to be my response object, and I will make it as employee response, right? And inside my employee response right now, I will not do any specific thing. First of all, let me just stop my console app, otherwise it will start reloading every time. So right now I will make sure one thing, this is my employee entity. What I'll do, I'll copy all the variables from here, Control-C it, paste it right here. Okay, one second. I'll copy out all the variables from my entity to my response. Okay, and I will make sure my entity variable names are same as my response variable name. This is not an entity class, so I'll be removing all the database mappings that I have for my columns, and there you go. So now I have ID, name, email, and blood group, and I have ID, name, email, and blood group right over here. Okay, so now we got the employee response here. We have all the variables right over here as well. And I'll create the getter and setter for everything. I'll select all, I'll do generate, and there you go. We should be good with everything. All the variables, let me cut it and move it to the top. And now we got our employee response right here. Cool, so we are good right now. Do a Control-Shift-O to remove any unnecessary imports, and now we should be good. Now what I want inside my employee controller, instead of returning an employee object directly, I'll be returning an employee response, because I do not want to expose my entity object to the outer world. So I'll do employee response, and I'll make sure this employee object over here, instead of returning the employee, I'll be returning the employee response over here. So this conversion, I will be doing it inside my service layer. So I'll go inside my service layer, and right over here, whenever I'm making a database call, here I am getting a employee object, right? So what I want to do in service only, I want to convert this employee that I'm getting to a employee response, right? Employee response. And to do that, first of all, I'll change my return type to employee response. And now I will make a conversion here. First of all, let me make it simple. Let me just create an employee response here. and is equal to new employee response. And then let me just manually set everything. Employee response dot set ID, and ID I'll be getting it from this employee because this is where I made a database call and I'm getting my data over here from my database. So I'll be fetching like get ID over here, and similarly I'll set the other thing. I'll say employee response dot set name, and I'll do employee dot get name, and I will do the same thing for the other couple of variables that I have. Employee response, Control C, paste it over here, Control B, and I will also set the blood group, and I'll get the blood group from the database. Here only I made the database call. I'll say employee dot get blood group, and right now I'll return the employee response instead of employee, which is my employee object. Right now I'm returning my employee response, which is the response object, which we will be actually exposing to the outer world, right? I think this is making sense right now. Okay, now,
Abhilash?
yeah.
Yeah, Abhilash, one question, Abhilash. So Abhilash, here you are like creating an employee response object with all these variables.
Yeah.
So just wanted to check, is it a good practice to
No.
create a mapper here of employee response?
It is a good practice to create a mapper here only. Right now, before introducing mapper, I'm just using it in this way. I will change it in 2 minutes. I'll use ModelMapper here. Okay.
I mean, like I know you taught ModelMapper, but I've seen like simple mapper also they are creating like a simple class named as mapper. And
Yes.
there they are doing this stuff from
Exactly.
23 from 27.
Exactly. You can create your own mapper here as well. Okay, if you don't trust like Mapstruct or ModelMapper, which are popular mapper here, which is going to help you to, let's say I have thousands of properties over here. If you don't want to map it like this, from one object to another object by doing some manual coding like this, obviously you can create your own mapper if you don't trust the third-party vendor. But right now I just did map everything by myself, and I'm returning my employee response, and I'll go back to my controller, and here this is right now no longer will get you a employee entity directly, rather it will get you, if I'll do control 1 assign statement to a new local variable, it is going to get you a employee response back. You just directly return this employee response right over here. And one more thing, let me just remove this thing, Control S, and I think we are good with our code. Control Shift O to remove any unnecessary imports, and we should be fine with our API development. The next thing that I want to do, obviously this thing will work good. Only one thing I want to do right now, obviously it will be a good practice to use a response entity here instead of sending our object directly. I want to set some status code manually so that, like, this is my body, this is my payload that I am returning whenever somebody is making a REST call. But along with this REST call, if I want to control the status and the various different properties, then the response entity will be a good thing, as I have discussed in the REST sessions. So here, what I will do, instead of returning the employee response directly that we are getting from a service call, I will use my response entity here. So response entity, and I will just use dot status, and you can use for a get request, I can give a status OK, and then the body or the payload is going to be this response that we are basically getting whenever we are making a service call. And this service call here is making a DB call right here, finding the employee, and then we are converting this employee to a employee response object and giving it back to our controller, and our controller is sending this particular response to the outer world by using this endpoint and exposing the employee response data along with the status code OK. OK means if you're going to hover on this, it is going to be 200. So do a Control S, relaunch your application, and let's see that if the things are working good right now. We have started our application, do send, and we are getting our things. Right now the status is 200 OK. And the people who are new to response entity, don't worry, if you might be thinking, okay, what's new over here? You are still getting 200 OK, because I have set the properties right over here. You just change it to something else, like created. Let's say if it is a post request and you are saying created, then obviously this will be right now changed to created over here, 201 created. So that's why I used a response entity, so that along with my body, Along with my payload that you are seeing over here, I can also control the status code, and that's why I have used the response entity where I'm setting my status code. But this is a get mapping, and for the get mapping I will basically give OK as the status code. Fine. The next thing that I'll be doing, one bad thing that I'm doing right over here, let me stop the application. Inside my service layer, I'm basically converting my entity object to my response object manually. Okay, so let's say if there are thousands of properties, it will be very impossible to do all these things by manually doing all these things. So we need to create a mapper. So as Akhil said, we can create a mapper by ourselves, but here I'll be using one of the popular mapper that we have in Java called ModelMapper. You can also use MapStruct if you are planning for that, but here I will go to Maven repository and I will just get the ModelMapper installed with my application. So I'll just look for ModelMapper and I will copy the properties of ModelMapper here, and I will go back to my Spring Boot application, go back to the pom.xml, and right here I'll be pasting it. Control B, Control A, Control Shift F, Control S. It's looking good. We are done with the things, and I think my ModelMapper is ready. So now first of all, let me quickly do a Maven update just to make sure that we get our dependency in our class path. And the next thing that I'll be doing here, I will be closing my pom.xml. I will start creating a ModelMapper. So I'll just have a ModelMapper instance here in my service class. I'll say ModelMapper, and I'll get it auto-word. Obviously this object will not be automatically created by boot because there are no auto configuration happening for this. The ModelMapper bean, you got to create it by yourself, but we'll do it in a little bit of time. But first of all, right now this ModelMapper instance, let's use it over here, and we can basically right now remove all this thing. We don't need to do all these things manually. So here we are getting our entity back whenever we are making a DB call, we are making a repository call. So here we can use ModelMapper. So ModelMapper.map, and you can see there are methods which takes the source and destination. The source is going to be, this is the source, this is where we have our data filled in whenever we are making a database call, and this data we want to map it to a class called employee response, right? So I'll say employee response dot class. Right now what will happen? So all the variables that we have over here, ID, name, email, blood group, all these properties right now will be mapped to this class properties, right? And this will be happen all automatically. Right now if you're gonna see, this property names are matching, ID is matching with this, name is matching with this, email is matching with this. Right now we are getting this object back whenever we are making a database call, and now all this data that we have inside these variables will be mapped automatically to this. We don't need to use a setter just the way we have done previously. So in our service right now, this mapper will map the data that we have over here into this class object, and it's going to return me a class object of, if we're going to assign statement to a new local variable of the employee response. So all this sort of thing we don't have to do right now, and we can simply delete it. Okay, and now there you go, we got the employee response back. And now if you're going to start our application, let's see if our mapper is working fine. Okay, we have a problem because right now some auto-where is failing. If you're going to look to the console closely, it is saying the employee service is having a required bean called ModelMapper, and ModelMapper is not found because the ModelMapper that we have auto-wared over here and trying to use the functionality of the ModelMapper of the map method, this is not, we are not able to call this because the ModelMapper is null right now and we don't have a bean present. So make sure to create a configuration file right here, and I'll create a new class, and this is going to be my employee app config. So let's say employee app config, and this one is going to be my, what we call that, config package, right? And right here inside my config package, I will have a configuration annotation so that it will be picked up by my dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet will help creating the beans that I'll be defining inside my configuration class. And basically I will have my ModelMapper bean defined here. ModelMapper, and there we go. And I will make it a bean, and here I will return a ModelMapper object. Okay, return a new ModelMapper object, new ModelMapper, do a Control-Shift-O, have the imports, and there you go. I think this time we are good. Let me relaunch the application, and this time our application should start off fine. Okay, and there we go. We have the port number 8080. Context path is right now not set, and I think things are good. And now let me go to my RESTful application, Postman, do a enter, and I'm getting my employee data back, right? So all the good practice are right now we have followed, and we are done with creating the first part of the things that we are planning to create over here. This data right now we have. Now we need to get the address response data by creating another address application or address service application. But first of all, tell me if we are good so far, whatever we have done. Pretty much boring thing to do because something that we are already familiar with. But tell me right now if everyone over here is clear with this thing. Like whoever has not attended all the sessions of Spring Boot and all the other stuff, you guys are also good with this or not, because this is some very basic thing. Can I just get some answer from you guys? Yes, no? So far we are good?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes,
Yeah, yes from, yes.
Why ModelMapper's bin has not been created before the configuration?
Because like ModelMapper is a third-party API, Supriya, and we do not have any auto configuration class written for ModelMapper. So the ModelMapper bean has not been created by Spring Boot, and as you can see the pom.xml, we have added the dependency by ourselves. It's a third-party API, so we should take the responsibility of creating the ModelMapper bean. It will not be created for you. If you're gonna directly use AutoWare, it will be fail injecting the bean because there will not be any bean found for that. Making sense, Supriya?
Okay, Anish.
Okay, cool. Got 3 things on the chat. Hello, sir, GM. Good morning, Felix. It must be a create bean. 1 second. I'm getting some calls here. Okay. Is it must to create a bean for ModelMapper? Yes, Felix, it's must. If you're not, it will not be creating. It will be a bean creation, like, it will be the AutoWare will be failed because the bean for ModelMapper will not be automatically created. So we are done creating our employee application. Now, before we do something else, first of all, let me stop the application. And now let's try to create another service right now. And let's start building this application right here, address application. How much time we have? 8:19. Okay, in 10 minutes, can I do it? Let's see that. So let me start creating another microservice. Let me create a Spring starter project. As I said, the address microservice is right now is going to be another microservice that we should have, and this is another application that we should deploy it inside another server, and this is something that we'll be doing right now. So first of all, let's create a address service, and this is going to be the application name, and let's say it is going to be address app is going to be the group ID, and the artifact will be address service, and description is address service, and the package name will be address app. Okay, there we go. And I think all the things is looking good right now. We can go for Spring Web, MySQL driver, DevTools, Data JPA, all the same things. Do a finish and let it create the address application. And by the time it's create the address application, also we'll be using ModelMapper here. So let me go to the previous application pom.xml file, go to the employee service, and here we have the pom.xml, and we have copy pasted our ModelMapper. Let me copy this guy as well, and let me cut this, go to the address service, and paste the ModelMapper here as well. So our dependency has been set for my address service as well. And I will make sure I will just collapse the employee service. I'll go to the address service. I will do a right click, Maven update project, just to make sure we are updating the project, and we should be good with this. Okay, so there we go. So address service, right now we are done with this, with the basic setup and the dependency. And the next thing that I'll be doing here, I'll be going to my table, and I'll create my address table here. So I'll create a new table first of all, and this is going to be my address table, and we will have a address ID, or let me just say ID here. This is going to be my primary key. Okay, something on the chat. Can we remove the dependency version from the ModelMapper? Yeah, Spring Boot will handle it. I will be coming back to this particular thing, Santosh. But for now, we are having the version number of the ModelMapper, because as it is a third-party API, that's why we are maintaining the versions inside our pom.xml for ModelMapper. Spring Boot will be automatically doing it. Yeah, that thing I'll be showing you on the parent pom. And also, if it is not there in the parent pom, what is the good practice of maintaining the version number? Also, I'll be letting you guys know whenever I'll be adding the other dependency. Okay, for now I'm closing it and going back to my address table. Okay, so right now I'll create the address column right over here. I'll also make sure this is going to be my primary key of my address table called address ID. The next thing that we'll have is, let's say, lane 1. There are some column like lane 2. There are some column like the state. There are some column like the Jeep, right? And there we go. Do an apply, close, and there you go. Right? We have our address table. Okay, one more thing we think we need to do here. How come somebody will know? Let's say there is some address called 1. Lane is sample lane 1. Lane 2 is, let's say, sample lane 2. State is, let's say, Odisha. Jeep is, let's say, 765677. Okay, so now if I'll do apply, how come somebody will know that this particular address is basically mapped to which employee? So for that, we need to create a one-to-one relationship by specifying a employee ID right over here as a foreign key. So for now, I will just try to alter my table. So can I do a alter table? And in my address, I will have one more column here called employee ID, so that you can track this address belongs to which employee. And this is going to be a foreign key. So make it an integer. Go to the foreign key section and try creating a foreign key for address. And this is going to be fk underscore address let's say fk underscore employee underscore ID. This is my foreign key name. And now we are inside the address table. So this foreign key is going to be referring to the employee table that we have. And in our address table, we got this column called employee ID. In the address table, we have lane 1, lane 2, state, Jeep, and also the employee ID. This is going to be referring to the ID column of the employee table. Now, if I'm going to do apply, this is going to help me to create a foreign key constraint. Do an apply, close, and right now we should have one more column right there called employee ID. And right now I can specify the employee ID right now here as 1, and also I'll put a sample Jeep here just to make sure that we are specifying a Jeep. Do a apply, and close. And now I can see this address is belongs to the employee ID 1, which is right now Avilash, because the employee ID 1 is basically pointing to Avilash. So now let's just try to make sure one thing. Let's go to the employee application that we have created earlier. Let's go to the resources section. And from here, from the resources, let me copy all the DB properties that we have set. Copy this, close it, collapse it. Now go to the address service and go to the resources section. Go to the application.properties file, and right here, paste your properties, right? So that whenever you will be starting your application, you will be connected to the Selenium Express new repository. That's good. So next thing that we'll be doing from here, we'll be start creating our, address service right here. So here we'll be creating a new controller, and we will be just doing it as like, we'll put inside some controllers package, and it will be like, address controller. Okay. And inside this address controller right now, we will make it a controller. Let me just expand this. This will be a REST controller. And the next thing that I'll be doing is that I'll be creating a public. It will give me an address response just the way we have created the previous one. And right now this will be get address by employee ID. So somebody will give you an ID of an employee that you will be getting through the parameter here as a path variable. And this will be like a employee ID that somebody will be giving, let's say employee ID, and you will be capturing this int ID. And now this is going to be my get mapping. Okay, and now the mapping will be slash address slash and some dynamic value, and this is going to be the dynamic value which we will get when somebody will hit the URL. Okay, so the next thing over here is going to be, you know what, we will be returning an address response right now. So let's create an address response here. So let me just create a new class, hover on this, click on new class, and right here I will say controllers, and I will put it inside a model, and this is going to be my response. Let me just say response, and now this is going to be address response, and now this is going to be my variables. Let's say private int ID. This is going to be my address ID anyhow, private string lane 1 and private string lane 2 and private what else we have, private string jeep or private long jeep. Let's say jeep is going to be an integer, and also we have state, private string state. This is going to be the response that we will be basically giving it back when somebody makes a API call that is this one. Okay, so there we go. So it's good. So maybe right now I can do one thing. I can just save this particular address response here, and I'll create the getter and setter for the same. I'll click on select all, do generate, and my getter and setter for the address response is created. Okay, so the next thing in the controller, I'll just create a address response object. Let's say address response, and I will initialize this to null, and now I will return this address response. Okay, obviously now we will fill in the data of address response right now by making a database call. This is good. So right now the next thing that we need to do here, this address response, I will not be directly returning it. It should be a response entity as I said before. So response entity, and I will map it to this guy. Okay, and now here I will just say response entity dot status, and status is going to be http status dot OK, and now the body is going to be this, like this object that I have created right here. And obviously this does not having any payload right now, but we'll be fetching it right now by making a database call. Fine. So now before we make a database call, let me just create a address entity as well. So let me just go ahead and create a class, and this is going to be my entity class. Okay, and the name of the class is going to be address right here. Okay, and first of all I will expand this and I'll make it an entity. So I'll do add entity and the add table, and I will point it to the address table. So the name of the table is going to be address. So I will go to my database, and this is going to be the table, right? Address. So let me copy the table name, go back to my application, paste it over here. So the next thing is that I will just have columns for everything. So I'll just do right click, copy field's name, go over there and paste it. And now let me just create all this particular variable for the same. I'll go to my address response right now, copy all this. Maybe I'll copy everything that I have here. Control C, go to my entity class and paste it. And now I will start giving it ID here for my identity key. Generated value will be strategy, will be identity. because I'm using MySQL here, and then I'll have my at column for this. At column, and my column is going to be this guy, ID. Oh, sorry, yeah, ID. So now I'll paste it for few more times. Okay, len2 zip state. Okay, and I think we are good. Now I will just replace my variable name here, len1, Control C, paste it as len1, and then len2. Okay, there are spaces in between. Why I kept spaces in between? We should not keep spaces anyhow. In the database column name, Control C, this is going to be the state, and zip, Control C, and this is going to be the zip. For employee ID, we don't want to create a one-to-one relationship right now. Rather, we'll make a DB. I'll just tell you, like, how we will find the employee ID. For now, you just ignore this employee ID column that we have inside our database, right? So now this is the address entity, and these are the value that I'm expecting the ID, len1, len2, zip, state, whenever I'm looking for a particular address inside the table, right? Now let's just create a repository. So now, first of all, what I need right now, in my repository, I'll go to my address application. I'll create a new package, and this is going to be my repository package. And inside my repo package, I'll be creating a new repository interface. So this is going to be address repository, address repo. Okay, and the address repo, okay, this address repo is basically an interface. So I'll change this class to an interface, and this is going to extend to JPA repository. Okay, and now what I want, JPA repository. Now the type of this is going to be address. This is the entity that we have just created, address entity, and the ID is over there a integer. Okay, there we go. Now what I want to find a address based on a ID. So let's just write a query right here to find an address based on a ID, based on a employee ID. So how can we write a query? If I'll tell you to write this requirement, or to write this particular, write code for this particular requirement, how will be finding it? Anyone? Any idea over here?
Find by property name, sir.
Find by property name. Okay, just help me to create this. Find by, then let's say find by, let's say I will create something, find address by employee ID. I want to write a manual query. So how I'll be writing it? Yes,
Employee ID is the parameter.
employee ID is a parameter. So somebody will give me the employee ID. So I'll write at param, and the param name is, let's say, employee ID. Okay, and this is like I'll store it like in a string employee ID. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll write a query here manually. Okay, and right now let's write the query. First of all, everyone please be on mute. I'm just go ahead and try writing a query here. So let me just go over here. Now I will just try to join the address table that we have here, that we have the address, and the employee table that we have the employee. I will join them based on the ID. And to write a join query, first of all, let's say I'll go to my address table. Okay, now I got all this data. So this is the table I want to join. Okay, this table name, I'll just make it as employee address EA. I will join that with employee table. So I'll copy this and paste it dot employee. If I'm going to join this on employee ID, let's say on ea.id, this is employee table, right? This is, let's say, E, where e.id is equal to ea dot, inside this we have employee ID, copy field name, paste it over here. Let me just run this. Let's see that what data we are getting. So right now I just performed a join, so that where like employee ID column and employee address table employee ID column is matching, I'm finding all those data. So I'm finding the data for name, email, blood group. These 3 columns is coming from my employee table, and these 4 columns that we have, or 5 columns that we have, we are getting it from the address table. And one more thing that I'll do here, I'll have a where clause, and I'll say where EA employee ID is equal to, let's say we will provide the ID here as 1. So if I'll do run this, the query is running fine. I do not need all the data here. I only need EA.ID. EA means address table. EA.ID, I need this ID, and then EA.lane1, let's say lane space 1. I think we have to give spaces for that. Okay, I'll do one thing, guys. In the address table, okay, I have done a blunder. I will just remove this space that I have between the lane 1 and lane 2. Okay, and I'll do apply, and close. I'll go to the address table right now. Yeah, the column name has been modified, and now I'll start giving EA.lane1, comma EA.lane2, comma EA.state, comma EA.zip. Right, now let's run this. Okay, now we are getting the address where the employee ID is 1. Right, so this is going to be my query that I'll be writing. Okay, so I will just move it to 1 line. This is my native SQL query. Where? There we go. And I think we have written our query. Do a Control-C, go to your application, your Spring application, and right now inside this query, give a value for this query and paste this one. Okay, and now this employee ID is equal to 1. This employee ID from where we'll be getting? We'll be getting it from here. So this is going to be my parameter value, right? I'll do Control-C this, and this ID, I will just dynamically get it, whatever somebody will provide. So if you're going to provide here 1, like this is going to be an integer value. If you're going to provide here 1, this 1 is going to be replaced right here. Okay, and I think things are good right now, and this is going to get me a address object back. Okay, there we go. So I think we are ready, and this is going to be a native SQL query. So I will also make sure I'll say native query, and I'll say true. Okay, and I think we'll be right now able to get, whenever we'll provide an employee ID, this is gonna get me this, all these columns from my address table. EAID, lane 1, lane 2, state, and zip, right? And also inside the address column, I'll remove these spaces because I did remove it from my database as well. Okay, and I think we are good right now. I'll good with the repo, so I'll close this. Right now I can start creating a service class. So I'll do right click, new, and I'll create a class, and this is going to be in my service class. Okay, and right now in my service class, I will be giving it as address service. Okay, and now I'll do a finish. This is my address service and @service. And right now I'll create a basically a method public. Let's say it will give me address response. Okay, and this particular method will be building. Now we need the address response. This will give back the address response right now, and this particular service method I want to call it from my controller right here. So this address response I can fill in, and I can send it back as a response, right? So to do that, I'll go to my service class right now, and let me design this one, right? So address service, and right now this is going to be a obviously this particular thing will have a employee ID. The employee ID will be capturing from the URL from the controller and will send it to the service class whenever the controller will call my service method. And the next thing that we'll be doing here is that we'll make a repo call. So we'll do address repo, and we will make it AutoWord. Okay, and we'll call this right now address repo, dot, and what is that? Find employee by employee ID, and pass in this ID. This is gonna get you back a address entity. Okay, and I'll say it address. And now you want to convert it back to address response, because this method returns address response, and for that we'll be needing a model mapper. So private model mapper, and make it auto where. Make sure to create this bean as well, auto where, and there we go, and make this particular variable as private as well. Okay, now we are good. Now let's use the model mapper to convert your entity object to the response object. Map, and right now the source and destination, this one is going to be a DV call. It's going to get you all the address stuff, and now I want to map it to a address response. Address response dot class. Okay, there we go. Do a control1 assign statement to a new local variable, and there we go, address response. Now you just send this particular guy back. Control B and return this. Okay, there we go. So right now we have our address response ready. So let's just have a call of this particular service class method in my controller. So let's go back to my controller, and in my controller right now, get this guy auto where. So just say private address service. Okay, make it auto where. Okay, there we go, and import the address service right here by hitting Control-Shift-O. Now just make a service call. You can just do, let me just trace this out a little bit, and right here let's do a service call, address service dot what is that? Address response. What is this oh, it should not be address response. Let's say find employee by employee ID. This is going to be my method name, right? Let's call this guy from my controller and pass in the ID, and this ID will be capturing right here from the URL. Okay, and there you go. I think we are done. And now this address response, you assign this guy with this.
That should be find address by employee ID or find employee.
Oh, okay, find address by employee ID. Correct. Find address by employee ID. There you go. Control C, Control S, and go over there, paste it here as well, and paste it here, Control S. Okay, all good. So let's test our application. Okay, the model mapper bean we need to create, right? So we will go to our app and we will create a config class, and this is the last thing that we will be doing right now. So this is going to be our config. This is going to be our address config, and do a finish. And right now, this is going to be a configuration class. Okay, and now I will just create a model mapper bean, public model mapper, because the model mapper bean we did not create and we're using model mapper. So you have seen that it will give us a problem if we'll not create the bean. So let's create the bean over here, and let's make sure we are returning a new model mapper object. There we go. Control-Shift-O to fix it, and we are all set. Let me close everything. Let me click on this and do right click, run as Spring Boot app, and let's test our microservice application right here. It started, and now if I'll go back to my Postman, right now it is also running in 8080 port number, right? And I'll say address slash, I'll give the employee ID, and the employee ID is 1. Let's do a send, and it is finding me the employee ID 1 address over here. Now what is my goal, and what we will be doing tomorrow is, what I need right now, whenever we'll be calling the employee slash 1, it will not only get me, okay, 8080, oh, my employee application is not running right now. Whenever, let's say, let me stop this application, and right now, whenever I'll be calling my employee service right now, run as Spring Boot app. Okay, now my employee service will be called. I'm starting my employee service. Let's say whenever I'll be calling this endpoint, employees, right? do a send. With this response, it is also going to get me the address response by making an internal call to the API whenever we'll be calling this endpoint right now in my employee service. Whenever we'll be hitting this endpoint right now in my controller, internally, this endpoint should make another call to my address microservice. This is, you can see where we have this class inside the employee service. So internally we'll make a call to the address service, and right now inside the address service, it should hit my address controller, this endpoint, and gonna get me the address response back, and we will set that response along with our employee response, and that employee response will contain the address as well. And this is something that we'll be doing in the next class. So in the next class, we will actually get started with the REST call, microservices communication, and also we will involve Spring Cloud from tomorrow onwards. And I will tell you some, the REST client that we'll be using, which is going to be something. What the REST client will not be REST template. We'll be using a fan client, and fan client is something that Spring Cloud is giving us to make REST calls. And tomorrow we're going to be having REST calls, and we're going to be communicating application to application between this couple of applications that we have created. We'll be having REST calls, and we'll be calling from here to here, and we'll be using a fan client to make a REST call, which is basically provided by Spring Cloud. So I'm wrapping it up right now. Obviously, it's more than 1 hour, but yeah, I got to develop this couple of services so that we can actually get started with our microservice right now. Okay, so far you guys are good, like nothing complex here. You guys understand everything, right? Can I get some confirmation, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Everything is good, no? Guys, I know this is boring. I'm sure it is boring. If you have already understood boot, REST and everything, this is something, should be very simple, right? So I think everyone who is watching this recording right now should be comfortable with this. I did not make it complicated. It was too boring for me to code even. But yeah, from tomorrow onwards, this is going to be interesting, because as we will be start adding Spring Cloud and microservices, obviously right now, okay. One good thing is that right now you have created couple of microservices. One is your address service, one is your employee service, right? So 2 applications you have created, and whenever you are starting this is running on its own Tomcat server. Whenever you are starting this, it is running its own embedded Tomcat server. So congratulations on creating 2 microservices. But yeah, the microservice to microservice communication part will be taking care of that tomorrow. All right. Okay.
Sir, one thing, sir, previously we used the REST template, no, sir, for the communication.
Exactly. Previously we have used REST template for communication.
You said that there was a REST template is an outdated one.
Exactly.
We have one more class called some HTTP client, something.
HTTP client we have web client. Remind me tomorrow, Srinivas, this point. I will tell you why REST template is bad. Why Spring is thinking to deprecate REST template, because REST template is a blocking call, and whenever you are dealing with microservices, you cannot basically block the entire application, because the REST template will block the entire thread, and your web server will not have thousands of threads to deal with requests. Remind me to tell you this particular point tomorrow. Anyhow, tomorrow what we will do, we will first use REST template to make the call. I'll tell you why REST template is bad, and then I will introduce fan client. Okay, and the web client, I will tell you on our web flux class. Whenever we'll talk about web flux and reactive programming, I will tell you why web flux and web client is coming, why it is recommended to use Spring Web Flux over Spring Web MVC. I'm not telling you that don't use Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC is still pretty much, in the market. You will be using it, but yeah, reactive calls and the web client we should use in microservices pretty much, because we will get the data asynchronously. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Will not complicate right now. Is it good to have multiple microservices sharing 1 DB? This is an anti-pattern, Manish. This should not be recommended. I will be telling about, like, you can have 2 microservices sharing 1 DB. I have seen many instances. Here I am doing it to make it simpler for the people who are getting started. But yeah, later what we'll be doing, we have MySQL, and I think I also have Postgres. We'll be using this couple of database, and we'll be start creating data, we'll be start using this couple of database for our different microservices. So yeah, creating one DB for a couple of microservices is not recommended, but yeah, it is an anti-pattern, possible, also been used by the microservices, but yeah, if you follow the good practices, not recommended. Okay, so yeah, any other questions from today's lesson?
In address repository, you use @param, right? It is used to change the name of the particular.
Come again, Chaitanya. In address repository,
You use @param.
@param. Yeah, go to the address repository. @param is, yeah, it's basically change the name. You can write anything over here and make sure that anything should be going here. Okay, so that whatever data you pass here, wherever you are calling this, let's say you are calling it from the service class, whatever data you are passing, it will be mapped to this, and their data will be mapped to this variable, and this variable will go here. Chaitanya.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Also, microservices communication is HTTP calls, as per my understanding. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Manish, absolutely. Microservices architecture is completely HTTP calls and is REST calls. And that is one of the biggest advantage of using microservices. If you compare to other architecture like SOA, where SOA architecture, I know people may be confused. I'll be telling you guys about SOA architecture as well. Let's start doing some coding and let's go to the architecture stuff later. But SOA, if somebody knows SOA, people who have around 5-6 years of experience or 10 years of experience, you should be well acquainted with SOA. In SOA also, we have ESB, we used to have Mule USB, Oracle USB, and there we used to have calls using SOAP. And that's why that was the demerit of that particular architecture, as SOAP calls are heavy weighted. But for microservices, we are using REST calls, and these are simple HTTP calls. Sir, I remember doing a project with ModelMapper on Spring Boot without manually creating the bean. Are there 2 types? Because it worked fine. I don't understand, Felix. Can you please pick, what you want to ask? I remember doing. Felix, can you repeat your question, please? I do not understand. Mic is not. Oh, okay. I remember doing a project with ModelMapper on Spring Boot without manually creating the bean. Are there 2 types? Because it worked fine. I don't understand. Anyone understood Felix's questions?
I think Avilas is trying to say that he has not even created that @bean in the configuration class for
is it so?
ModelMapper, but
okay. Is it so, Felix? I do not remember. You tried it, or I did try it in your batch, maybe the 2020 or 2021 batch. I don't remember, Felix. Yeah, maybe just show me any instances if I have done it. But I think ModelMapper will not be auto-configured. You should be doing it by yourself because it's the third-party API. All right. Any other questions, guys, from your end? All good? Okay, no questions. Shital, Sujay, Supriya, Sushmita, any questions from your end? Chandrakant, Aparna, Anusha, yeah? No? Okay.